Tonight, we will walk through old temples and quiet gardens, where monks sat beneath the moon and masters said very little, and in that little changed everything. These are stories that were never carved into stone or printed in great books. They were passed from teacher to student in the dark, whispered over tea, offered like a candle, handed from one palm to another. And tonight, they are yours. There is nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to understand. Just listen and let the night carry you. Before we begin, I would love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And what time is it where you are? Feel free to share in the comments. And if these quiet stories help you find rest, a like or a subscribe means the world to this small channel. It helps others who cannot sleep find their way here too. Now let us settle in together. These are not lessons to memorize or rules to follow. They are simply stories. Old stories, gentle stories, the kind that were told not in classrooms, but in courtyards after dark, when the day's work was done and the only agenda was rest. You do not need to know anything about Buddhism or Zen to receive what is offered here. You do not need to have read anything, practiced anything, or believed anything. Tonight, you are simply someone who is lying down. And these are simply words meant to keep you company until sleep arrives. The tradition we will draw from tonight is called Zen, a path that has been walked for over 1,000 years. But it was never a path of books or lectures. It was a path of quiet conversations between monks on cold nights, of old masters pointing at the moon and saying nothing, of sweeping, cooking, pouring tea, and finding, in these ordinary acts, something that no scripture could contain. These are the stories that survived not because they were important, but because they were true. And truth, it turns out, travels well in the dark. So settle in now. Let your body find its weight against whatever is holding you. Feel the surface beneath you, the pillow, the blanket, the mattress, holding you the way the earth holds a stone, without effort, without complaint. Let your breath slow, not because you are told to, but because it is ready. Let the muscles behind your eyes soften. Let your hands rest wherever they have come to rest. You do not need to arrange anything. You do not need to prepare. The night is long, and the stories are patient, and there is nowhere we need to arrive. Thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma. Let us begin. The first story tonight begins in a place where the only sound was water. Not a river or a waterfall, but something smaller, something closer. A stream that ran beneath the floor of a workshop, so quiet that most people forgot it was there. But she never forgot. She had been listening to it for 40 years. She was a weaver. She had learned the craft from her mother, who had learned it from hers. And the workshop where she worked was the same one where she had played as a child, crawling beneath the loom, while her mother's feet worked the pedals above. The walls were dark wood, stained by decades of damp air and lantern smoke. Shelves along one side held spools of silk thread in colors she could name without looking: persimmon, moss, riverstone, the pale gold of early morning. Her hands were rough in the way that only decades of thread can make them. The fingertips slightly flattened, the knuckles wide. She could feel a single strand of silk that was too thick or too thin, just by rolling it between her thumb and forefinger, the way a musician hears a note that is slightly flat. The loom itself was old, older than her, and it creaked with each pass of the shuttle. A rhythm so familiar it had become part of the silence, rather than a break in it. The air in the workshop always smelled of damp silk, and the faint sweetness of the lotus tea she brewed each evening in a clay pot by the window. On cold nights, she would add a piece of dried ginger, and the steam would rise and curl through the lamplight like something alive. In the corner stood a basket of finished cloth, pieces she had woven for customers in the village. A scarf, the color of autumn plums, for the schoolteacher's wife. A bolt of pale green for the tailor who made children's festival clothes. Each one she could identify by touch alone, even in the dark, because the weave held the memory of the day she made it, the tension of her hands, the speed of the shuttle, whether she had been calm or hurried. Cloth remembers the weaver, her mother used to say, even after the weaver has forgotten. The window beside her chair looked out onto a path that led down to the village. On clear nights, she could see the lights of 3 houses below, and sometimes the lantern of someone walking home late. Tonight the path was dark, the village was asleep, only she was still awake. But tonight, the tea had gone cold, the loom was still, and she was sitting in the chair by the window, not weaving, not sleeping, just sitting with a mind that would not rest. It was doing what it always did on nights like this, replaying the spool she had wound too loosely that morning, the words she had said to the neighbor's daughter. Too sharp, she thought now, though at the time they had seemed reasonable. The letter from her own daughter, who lived 3 towns away and had not visited in months. Was she well? Was she eating? Was she lonely? The mind pulled each thread and examined it, turned it over, held it up to the light, then set it down only to pick up another. She had tried what people try, breathing slowly, counting backward from 100, telling herself firmly to stop. She had even tried what her daughter once suggested, writing the worries down on paper and putting them in a drawer. But the drawer did not hold them. They seeped back out like water through a crack, because telling the mind to stop is like telling the stream beneath the floor to stop. It does not listen. It was not built to listen. It was past midnight when she heard the gate. The old man who swept the temple grounds 3 hills over sometimes walked this way on sleepless nights of his own. He was very old. She did not know how old, and he moved slowly with a bamboo stick that he used less for walking and more, she suspected, for company. He had a habit of arriving without announcement and leaving without farewell, as if visiting were something the wind did, and not something that required intention. She poured him tea. He held the cup with both hands and said nothing for a long time. "My mind will not stop tonight," she said finally. He looked at her the way one looks at rain, without surprise, without judgment. What is it doing? Going over things. Things I said, things I did not say, things I cannot change. "Ah," he said, "it is weaving." She almost smiled. "It is weaving badly." He set the cup down. "Tell me, the stream beneath your floor, does it bother you?" "The stream? No, I have heard it my whole life. But it never stops." "No, and you have never once tried to make it stop." She paused. "No, I suppose I have not." "You did not decide to accept the stream," he said. "You simply never argued with it. It speaks, and you let it speak, and you go on weaving." She looked down at her hands. The lamplight caught the calluses on her palms. "Your mind," he said, "is not so different from that stream. It moves because that is what it does. You do not need to dam it. You do not need to follow it. You only need to stop pretending it should be dry." The old teaching the Buddha once offered comes to mind here, that the wise become perfectly purified, like a lake, deep, clear, and still. Not a lake without water. Not a lake that has been emptied. A lake that has simply stopped fighting its own surface. He finished his tea, set the cup upside down on the saucer, his way of saying he was done, and walked back into the dark without saying goodbye. She listened to the tap of his stick on the stone path until it faded. Then she sat back down at the loom. She did not weave. She just sat. And for the first time in a very long while, she heard the stream. Really heard it, not as background, not as noise, but as something that had been keeping her company all along. Her hands rested on the wooden frame. The candle burned low. The silk threads hung still in the lamplight, waiting for morning. And the stream went on speaking beneath her, as it always had, as it always would. Tonight, if your mind is doing what hers was doing, turning over the day, examining conversations, reaching for things it cannot fix at this hour, there is nothing wrong with it, nothing broken, nothing to repair. The mind moves the way water moves, not because it is failing you, but because that is its nature. And just as she sat beside the stream without asking it to stop, you can lie here beside your own thoughts without needing to silence them. You do not need to empty the mind. You only need to stop arguing with its current. The Buddha, 2,500 years ago, spoke of this calm in the simplest of terms. He said that the one who is truly at peace is calm in thought, calm in speech, calm in action. Not because the world has gone quiet, but because they have stopped adding noise to it. Calm is not the absence of sound. It is the willingness to let sound pass through without holding on. And perhaps that is what the old man was pointing at, without ever quite saying it. There is a small pond not far from where this story takes place. A shallow thing, no bigger than a dining table, tucked behind a row of stones at the edge of the temple grounds. After a heavy rain, the water turns the color of clay. Mud rises from the bottom, stirred by the downpour, and for an hour or two, the pond looks as though it has been ruined, as though it will never be clear again. But no one cleans it, no one filters it, no one stands over it with a net, trying to remove the cloudiness. A frog sits on one of the stones at the edge, unbothered. A single leaf floats on the surface, turning slowly. The air above the water smells of wet earth and moss, and if you knelt close enough, you could feel the faint coolness rising from it, the way a cellar breathes when you open the door. The pond simply sits, and the mud, having nowhere to go and nothing to hold it up, settles. Grain by grain, particle by particle, it drifts back to the bottom. And by evening, the water is so clear, you can see the single stone that lies at its center, smooth and pale, as if it had been placed there on purpose. The mind, on a night like this, is not so different. It has been stirred. The day has poured through it. Conversations, worries, tasks left undone, faces you cannot quite stop seeing. And the temptation is to reach in and fix it, to filter and sort and clean. But the pond does not need your hands. It knows how to settle. It has been settling long before you learned to worry about it. So perhaps tonight you can be the one who does not reach in, the one who simply sits beside the water and waits. Not because waiting is easy, but because the clearing was never yours to do. Now let us walk a little further into the night, to a place higher up, where the air is thinner and the stars are closer. There was a man who had spent most of his life at the gate of a monastery on a hill. He was not a monk. He had never taken vows, never shaved his head, never sat in the meditations hall with the others. His job was simpler than that. He opened the gate in the morning and closed it at night. He swept the stone path that led from the road to the entrance. He kept a small fire burning in the gatehouse during winter, so that anyone who arrived cold would have a place to sit before going further. He had been doing this for nearly 50 years. He did not consider it a calling or a spiritual practice. It was simply what he did. The way a river does not consider itself a river, it just moves. The monastery sat on a hill where pine trees grew so tall they seemed to lean into the sky. On clear nights, the moon would rise over the ridge behind the temple and light the stone path like a river of milk. The roof tiles, covered in moss, so old it had turned silver, caught the moonlight and held it, and from a distance, the whole building looked as though it were glowing from within. In winter, snow would gather in the corners of the gate, soft, quiet accumulations that he never hurried to clear, because he liked the way the courtyard looked when it was half white and half stone. His gatehouse was a single room with a low ceiling, a charcoal brazier, and a wooden bench worn smooth by decades of sitting. The walls smelled of pine resin and old smoke. A single window faced the path, and through it he could see anyone coming or going without standing up. He kept a pot of water warming on the brazier at all times, not for tea particularly, but because the sound of water about to boil was, to him, the friendliest sound in the world. On the wall behind the bench hung a single piece of calligraphy, 4 characters he could not read, left by a monk who had passed through decades ago. He had never asked what it said. He liked not knowing. It gave the room a question it never needed to answer. One winter night, a young monk came to the gate. He had been at the monastery for 3 years, and had spent most of that time in the meditation hall, sitting, trying to find the quiet mind that his teacher kept describing. He had read about it. He had heard lectures about it. He had sat through 10,000 breaths trying to reach it. And tonight, he had given up. He sat down on the bench across from the old man and said, "How is your mind so quiet?" The old man looked at him. The charcoal shifted in the brazier, sending a small constellation of sparks into the air between them. "My mind is not quiet," he said. The young monk frowned. "But you seem so peaceful." "That is different." "How is it different?" The old man poured water into 2 cups, though the young monk had not asked for any. "My mind talks all day. It worries about the gate. It wonders if I left the fire too low. It remembers things from 30 years ago that do not matter anymore. It is a very busy mind." Then how? I stopped answering it. He held the cup with both hands. "That is all. It speaks, and I let it speak, and I do not speak back. I do not agree with it or disagree with it. I do not tell it to stop. I just..." He looked toward the window. The moon was fully up now, and the path was white. "I just let it be another sound in the room, like the fire, like the wind." The young monk turned his cup slowly in his hands. "But the thoughts, they feel so urgent, like they need me to respond." "Does the wind need you to respond?" "No, and yet you hear it." "Yes, and it passes." The young monk looked at the fire. A log had burned through its center and collapsed softly into 2 halves, each still glowing. "I have spent 3 years trying to make my mind like an empty room," he said quietly. The old man smiled, not broadly, just a slight movement at the corners of his mouth, the kind of smile that has been worn smooth by decades. "An empty room is a lonely place. I would rather have a room with a fire and a wind and a mind that chatters. At least then there is company." The young monk almost laughed. It was the first time in months that something had struck him as funny rather than profound. "You are looking for silence," the old man said. "But silence is not what you think it is. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the absence of resistance to sound." The young monk said nothing for a long time. An old Zen teaching, often traced to Huineng, the sixth patriarch, tells us that when the monks argued about whether the wind was moving or the banner was moving, the master said, "It is neither the wind nor the banner. It is your minds that are moving." And perhaps what the old gatekeeper had found, without ever reading that teaching, was the same thing. The mind moves. That is what minds do. Peace is not in the stopping. It is in the moment you stop minding the movement. The young monk did not leave right away. He sat on the bench beside the old man, and for the first time in 3 years, he was not trying to be quiet. He was just sitting. The fire crackled. The wind moved through the pines outside. Snow fell, slowly without urgency, and settled on the stone path in the moonlight. 2 figures in a small room on a hill, one very old and one very young, neither of them saying anything, neither of them needing to. Outside, the pine branches caught the snow and held it, not tightly, the way a hand grips, but loosely, the way a palm opens to receive. And when the branches had held enough, they bent and let the snow slide off in a soft rush, then rose again, empty, ready. And perhaps, right now, as you lie here, something similar is happening without your permission. Perhaps the shoulders have begun to ease, not because you told them to, but because they have been listening to these stories too, and they have started to remember what it feels like to not hold anything up. Perhaps the jaw has loosened, just slightly, in a way you did not notice until this moment. Perhaps the breath has found its own rhythm, slower than it was 20 minutes ago, deeper than you intended. This is not something you need to create. It is something your body already knows how to do. The old gatekeeper called it not answering the mind. The Buddha might have called it something else. Bodhidharma, the monk who carried Zen from India to China, once said that not thinking about anything is Zen. And once you know this, walking, standing, sitting, or lying down, everything you do is Zen. Everything, including this, including lying here in the dark, listening to an old man talk about fire and wind, and a mind that never learned to be still. The Pali word for this quality is Samatha. It is usually translated as tranquility or calm, but those words suggest something you achieve, a destination, a finish line. Samatha is closer to what happens when you stop running, not the silence of an empty room, but the stillness of a lake that has stopped fighting its own ripples. You do not create Samatha. You uncover it the way the pond uncovered its own clarity, simply by being left alone. So tonight, you do not need to reach for calm. You do not need to build it, or earn it, or deserve it. It is already here, beneath the noise, beneath the worry, beneath whatever the mind is still turning over. It has been here the whole time, like the stream beneath the weaver's floor, like the moon above the gatekeeper's path, quiet, patient, waiting for you to stop looking for it, so it can finally be found. And maybe right now, without trying, you notice that the weight of your body has shifted, settled a little deeper into wherever you are resting. The hands may feel heavier than they did a few minutes ago. The feet, wherever they are, may have gone warm. These are not things you need to create or maintain. They are simply your body doing what it has always known how to do when the mind stops giving it instructions. The weaver knew this. The gatekeeper knew this, and now, lying here, you know it too, not because you learned it, but because you remembered. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is another kind of stillness we have not spoken of yet. The stillness of not knowing, of standing at a door you have never opened and choosing not to guess what is on the other side. That is where we go next. There is a kind of fear that is quieter than most. It does not shout. It does not make the heart race. It simply sits in the chest, like a stone you swallowed without noticing, and it whispers one question over and over. What now? It is the fear of not knowing, and if you have ever stood at the edge of a life you did not plan, a retirement, a loss, an ending you did not choose, you know exactly what it feels like. So let us sit with that tonight. Take one more slow breath, and let us see what happens when we stop needing to know. She had spent 34 years in a hospital, not as a doctor, as a nurse. The kind of nurse who arrived before the doctors and stayed after they left. The kind who knew which room the sunlight reached first in the morning, and which patient needed the curtain opened before they asked. She had memorized protocols the way a musician memorizes scales, not by thinking, but by doing, until her hands knew what to do before her mind caught up. Blood pressure, pulse, temperature, medication schedule. The body was a system, and systems could be understood, and understanding meant control, and control meant safety. She retired on a Tuesday in March. There was a small cake in the break room, lemon, with white frosting, the kind the cafeteria ordered for every occasion, and a card signed by people whose handwriting she recognized, but whose faces she was already beginning to forget. Someone had written, "Enjoy the rest you deserve," and she had smiled and nodded, and driven home through streets that looked different at 2 in the afternoon than they did at 6 in the morning, when her shifts usually ended. The light was wrong, too bright, too casual. The houses looked like they belonged to someone else's life. The first week, she cleaned the house from top to bottom, a project she had been meaning to do for years. The second week, she organized the hall closet. By the third week, the house was spotless, and she had nothing left to organize. She sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold, while she stared at the clock, watching the second hand make its rounds the way she used to watch monitors beside a patient's bed. But no one was attached to this clock. It was just measuring empty time. The garden behind her house was small, just a strip of earth between the back wall and the fence, no wider than a dining table. She had never paid it much attention. There had never been time. But now, in the first week of a life without schedules, she found herself standing at the back door each morning, looking at it. The soil was dark from the spring rains, almost black where the fence cast its shadow. A few weeds had pushed through, stubborn, unnamed things with pale roots that clung to the dirt when she pulled them. The air smelled of wet earth and cut grass from the neighbor's yard, and there was a coolness to the mornings that she had not noticed before, a dampness that settled on her forearms and made the hairs stand up. She did not know what to plant. That was the problem. In the hospital, she had always known the next step. Check the chart, administer the dose, monitor the response. Here, standing in a strip of dirt with a trowel she had found in the shed, she did not know anything. She did not know which seeds would take in this soil. She did not know how deep to plant them. She did not know if the fence blocked too much light, or if the drainage was right, or if the neighbor's cat would dig everything up by Thursday. She was not used to not knowing. It made her hands feel empty in a way that had nothing to do with gloves. The woman next door was older, perhaps 80, perhaps more. She had been gardening the same patch of earth for as long as anyone could remember. Her garden was not beautiful in the way magazine gardens are beautiful. It was tangled, overgrown in places, bare in others. Some things grew where they were planted, and some things grew where they chose, and she did not seem to mind the difference. One morning, the nurse stood at the fence and watched the old woman kneeling in the dirt, pressing seeds into a row she had drawn with her finger. "How do you know which ones will grow?" the nurse asked. The old woman looked up. Her hands were black with soil to the wrists. "I do not." "Then how do you decide what to plant?" "I plant what I have, and then I wait." "But what if they die?" The old woman sat back on her heels. There was dirt on her cheek, and she did not wipe it away. She looked at the row of seeds, invisible now, buried, and then at the nurse, and she smiled in a way that was not reassuring so much as honest. "Some of them will die," she said. "That is certain. Last year, I planted 40 sunflower seeds, and 11 came up. The year before, I planted tomatoes, and the frost took everyone." She brushed her hands on her apron, but the ones that died fed the soil. The roots broke up the clay. The leaves composted into the earth right where they fell. "Nothing I plant is wasted. It just does not always become what I expected." The nurse had expected the old woman to be sad about the dead plants. She had prepared, in her mind, to offer comfort, the way she had done 10,000 times in hospital rooms. But there was no grief in the old woman's voice. There was something else, something closer to amusement, as if the not knowing were not the difficult part, but the interesting part. An old teaching comes to mind here. When the monk Joshu asked his teacher Nanquan, "What is the way?" Nanquan said simply, "Ordinary mind is the way." And when Joshu pressed, "Should I direct myself toward it?" Nanquan replied, "If you try to turn toward it, you betray your practice." The way, he was saying, does not belong to the realms of knowing or not knowing. It is not a destination you can plan a route to. It is what is already happening when you stop trying to steer. The nurse stood at the fence for a long time after the old woman went inside. Then she knelt down in her own strip of earth. She did not have a plan. She did not have seeds. She just put her hands into the soil, both hands, flat, fingers spread, and felt the cold weight of it against her palms. The dampness, the grit, the small stones, she could not see but could feel, pressing into the lines of her hands, like a language she did not need to read. For the first time in 34 years, she was not reaching for the next step. She was just here, kneeling in dirt that smelled of rain and roots, and something older than either. A worm moved slowly through the soil beside her thumb, unhurried, going about its work without a chart or a protocol or a plan. She watched it disappear beneath a clod of earth and felt something loosen in her chest. A knot she had not known she was tying. She was just here, not knowing what would grow, and finding, to her surprise, that the not knowing felt less like falling and more like the moment just before a door opens, when you can feel the air change on the other side but cannot yet see what is there. Tonight, if you are lying here trying to figure something out, what tomorrow holds, what you should have done differently, what the right next step is, perhaps you can set that down. Not forever. Not because the questions do not matter, but because the answers are not available at this hour. And the trying is what is keeping the body tense and the mind awake. The poet Monk Ryokan who lived alone in a hut on a mountainside 800 years ago, once wrote, "To enjoy life's immensity, you do not need many things." He did not say, "You need nothing." He said, "You do not need many things." And perhaps tonight, the one thing you do not need is certainty. Perhaps the not knowing is not a problem to solve, but a space to rest in. The way a bird rests on a thermal it did not create and does not understand, but trusts enough to stop flapping. There is an old Zen story, very short, barely a story at all, that has been passed from teacher to student for over 1,000 years. A young monk came to the master Joshu and asked, "What is the way?" Joshu said, "Ordinary mind is the way." The monk said, "Should I try to direct myself toward it?" And Joshu's teacher, Nanquan, who had been asked this same question years before, had answered, "If you try to direct yourself toward it, you turn away from it." The monk was confused. "But if I do not try, how will I ever know the way?" And the master said, "The way is not a matter of knowing or not knowing. Knowing is delusion, not knowing is blankness. When you have really reached the way beyond doubt, you will find it as vast and boundless as outer space. How can it be talked about on the level of right and wrong? This is not a riddle. It is an invitation to stop grasping for the answer long enough to notice that the question itself has dissolved. The way fog dissolves when the sun comes, not because someone chased it away, but because the conditions changed. Now let us walk a little further into the evening to a narrower street, where the buildings lean close enough to touch and the light comes in at angles. There was a man who repaired books, not new books, old ones, books whose spines had cracked, whose pages had come loose, whose covers had been worn soft by decades of hands. His workshop was a single room at the end of an alley so narrow that the afternoon sun only reached the window for about 40 minutes each day. And during those 40 minutes the light came in at such a steep angle that it lit up every particle of dust in the air, turning the room into something that looked, briefly, like the inside of a snow globe. The walls were lined with shelves, and the shelves were lined with books in various states of disrepair, some missing covers, some missing pages, some held together with nothing but habit and a thin strip of cloth. The air smelled the way old paper smells when it has been in the same room for a long time. A dry, sweet, slightly mushroom scent that he had stopped noticing years ago, but that visitors always commented on. Beneath that, there was the smell of the hide glue he heated on a small stove in the corner. Animal and warm, like a barn in winter. His hands were stained with ink and glue in patterns that never fully washed out. The creases in his knuckles were permanently dark, as if the books had written something on him in return for all the years he had spent holding them together. He worked slowly, not because he was old though he was, but because the work required it. A page torn in 1920 does not care about deadlines. It only cares about being held in place while the glue dries. A young woman came into the shop one afternoon. She was perhaps 25, and she carried a phone in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. And she looked around the room with the kind of expression people wear when they have walked into a museum by accident. "Do people still read these?" she asked, not unkindly. "Some do," he said without looking up. He was threading a needle through the spine of a book whose title had been worn away. The thread was linen, waxed by hand. He kept a block of beeswax on the windowsill for this purpose, and the wax had softened in the afternoon light until it was the color of honey. "Are you not worried that all of this will disappear, that no one will need books like these anymore?" He set the needle down and looked at her. "This book," he said, tapping the cover with one finger, "is missing its last 30 pages. I do not know how it ends. I do not know if the story resolves. I do not even know the title anymore. The cover page fell out before it came to me." "Then why are you fixing it?" "Because the pages that remain are still worth holding together." He picked up the needle again. "I do not need to know the ending to do good work today." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "But does it not feel pointless? Working on something that is already broken, that might break again?" He pulled the thread through slowly, watching the needle emerge from the other side of the spine. "Everything I have ever worked on was already broken," he said. "That is why it came to me. And everything I repair will break again, eventually. But between this breaking and the next, someone will open it, someone will read a page, and for that moment, the book will be whole. That is not pointless. That is the whole point." She stood there for a moment, coffee cooling in her hand, and something in her expression shifted, not dramatically, not the way it happens in films, but the way a cloud moves off the sun, a small brightening. Then she thanked him and left, and the bell above the door rang once, and the dust settled back into the light. Nanquan, the old Zen master, once told his student, "If you try to turn toward the way, you betray your practice." And perhaps the bookbinder understood this without ever having heard it. He was not trying to save the book. He was not trying to preserve the past or defeat the future. He was just sewing, one stitch at a time, in a room full of broken things. And that was the way. He sat for a long time after she left, his hands resting on the open book. The light had moved past the window now, and the room was dim again. He smoothed the page he had been working on, gently, the way you smooth a blanket over someone who has fallen asleep, and closed the cover. The spine held, not perfectly, but well enough. And tomorrow he would open another book and begin again, and not know the ending of that one either. And that, he had come to believe, was not a failure of the craft. It was the craft itself. There is a word in the old language of the Buddha, anicca. It is usually translated as impermanence, and when people hear it for the first time, they often hear it as a warning. Everything changes, nothing lasts. Hold on while you can. But that is not quite what it means. Anicca is not a warning. It is a doorway. It is the reason anything new can begin. If the seed did not change, it could never become a flower. If the night did not change, there could be no morning. If the bookbinder's pages did not age and loosen, he would have no work, no purpose, no 40 minutes of light through a dusty window each afternoon. Impermanence is not the enemy of meaning. It is the condition that makes meaning possible. And tonight, lying here, perhaps you can feel this, not as a concept, but as a sensation. The breath that just left your body is gone. It will not return. And already another one is arriving, without your help, without your planning. The hands may have opened slightly, not because you decided to open them, but because something in the body recognized that there was nothing left to hold. The chest may have softened. The space behind the eyes may feel a little wider, a little more like sky, and less like a wall. You do not need to know what tomorrow looks like. You do not need to have a plan for the morning or a reason for the evening. The old woman in the garden did not know which seeds would grow. The bookbinder did not know how the story ended, and they were not diminished by this. They were freed by it, freed to put their hands in the dirt, freed to sew the next page, freed to be exactly where they were, without needing to be anywhere else. When you are ready, we will continue together. And there is a word for what comes after letting go of certainty. It is not emptiness. It is not loss. It sounds, when you say it slowly, like arriving, like sitting down at a table you have been circling for years and discovering that someone has already set a place for you. That is where we go next. There is a question that arrives, usually late at night, when the house is quiet and the distractions of the day have run out. It does not come in words, exactly. It comes as a feeling, a hollowness, a wondering. Have I done enough? Is this enough? Am I enough? Let us sit with that question tonight. Not to answer it, but to see what happens when we stop asking. She had been a teacher for 30 years. Elementary school. The age when children still raise their hands for everything, still run in the hallways, still believe that their teacher knows the answer to every question in the world. She had loved it the way you love something that exhausts you, completely, recklessly, with the kind of devotion that leaves no room for anything else. 200 children a year. 6,000 children over a career. She knew their names for a while after they left, and then she did not. And that was the part no one told her about. The slow forgetting of faces she had once known better than her own. She retired at 62. Her daughter helped her carry the last box from her classroom. Construction paper, a stapler, shaped like a whale that the children had loved. A coffee mug that said, "World's okayest teacher," that she had bought for herself as a joke, and then could not bring herself to throw away. Now she was 63, and it was winter, and she lived alone in a house that had once held 4. Her husband had died 6 years ago, quietly, the way he had done most things, in his sleep on a Sunday morning. Her son lived overseas. Her daughter lived 2 hours away and called every week, always on Wednesdays, always at 7. The kitchen was the warmest room in the house, and she spent most of her mornings there. It was small, just a counter, a stove, a window that faced east. The light came in pale and flat in winter, reflected off the snow in the yard, so that the room seemed to glow from the outside in. The walls were painted a yellow that had faded to cream over the years, and there were marks on the door frame where she had measured her children's heights. Small pencil lines with initials and dates that she could no longer read without her glasses. On the windowsill above the sink, she kept 3 things. A small cactus her son had sent from somewhere dry, a smooth stone she had picked up on a beach the year her husband was still alive, and a photograph in a wooden frame of her first class. 31 children sitting on a gymnasium floor, all of them looking in slightly different directions, all of them now in their 40s. She did not look at the photograph often, but she liked knowing it was there, the way you like knowing the stars are above the clouds even when you cannot see them. Each morning she made oatmeal, the same kind, the same pot, the same blue bowl, with the chip on the rim that she had never replaced because it fit her hands perfectly. She would stand at the stove and watch the oats thicken, stirring slowly, and the steam would rise and carry the smell of cinnamon through the kitchen, a smell so familiar it had become invisible. The way the walls were invisible, the way the ticking of the clock on the wall above the refrigerator was invisible. The cat, a grey tabby named after a student she had particularly liked, though she no longer remembered which one, would sit on the chair beside the stove and purr, not because she was being fed, but because the sound of stirring was, for reasons known only to cats, deeply satisfying. The phone rang on a Wednesday at 7. Her daughter's voice, warm and slightly hurried, the way it always was, as if she were fitting the call between two other things. "Hi, Mom. How are you?" "I am fine, sweetheart. Do you need anything?" She looked around the kitchen. The oatmeal was cooling in the bowl. The cat was on the chair. The snow was falling outside, in flakes so large, they looked like feathers. She opened her mouth to answer, and then closed it again. What did she need? She thought about the question, the way she used to think about lesson plans, turning it over, examining it from different angles. She needed groceries, but the neighbor had offered to drive her on Friday. She needed to call the dentist, but that could wait. She needed what? What was the word for the thing she was feeling? It was not loneliness. Exactly. It was more like smallness, as if her life, which had once filled an entire school building, now fit inside a single kitchen. And the kitchen, though warm, felt very quiet for a life that had once been so loud. "Mom, are you there?" "Yes, I am here. I do not think I need anything." "Are you sure?" She looked at the bowl of oatmeal. The steam had stopped rising. A skin had formed on the surface, thin, translucent, the way ice forms on a puddle overnight. She picked up the spoon and broke through it. "Yes," she said, "I am sure." Her daughter paused. "You know, Mom, you could come stay with us for a while. The kids would love it. We have that extra room." "I know, sweetheart. Maybe in the spring." "You said that last spring." "Did I?" She smiled, though her daughter could not see it. "Then maybe I will mean it this time." They talked for a few more minutes, about the weather, about the grandchildren, about a recipe for lentil soup that her daughter wanted to try. Small things. The kind of conversation that holds no information but carries everything. When they hung up, she held the phone in her hand for a moment, feeling its warmth. Borrowed warmth, from her daughter's voice, from her own palm. After she hung up, she sat at the table for a long time. The cat jumped onto her lap, a heavy, warm weight that pressed into her thighs like a living blanket. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, the clock ticked. The oatmeal, when she finally tasted it, was still warm enough. And it was in that moment, not a dramatic moment, not a moment of revelation, but a very small, very ordinary moment, that she noticed something. The kitchen was not empty. It was full of steam and cinnamon, and the weight of a cat, and the sound of snow falling against glass. Full of the cup of tea she would make next. Full of the book. She was halfway through, the one about the woman who sailed around the world alone, which she would read this afternoon, in the chair by the window. Full of Wednesday, which was her favorite day of the week because her daughter called. The Buddha once said, and it is one of the gentlest things he ever said, "Let us live happily, though we call nothing our own. We shall be like the bright gods, feeding on happiness, not feeding on possessions, not feeding on accomplishments, feeding on happiness itself, the kind that does not need a reason, the kind that arrives when you stop asking for more and notice what is already here." She finished the oatmeal. She washed the bowl. She set it upside down on the drying rack, the way she had done every morning for 40 years. And the kitchen, which she had thought was too small for a life, turned out to be exactly the right size. Perhaps tonight, lying here, you know this feeling. The quiet suspicion that your life has become too small, that the things you do each day, the routines, the small tasks, the same rooms, the same meals, do not add up to something that matters. The poet monk Ryokan who chose to live in a leaking hut with almost nothing, once said, "I have nothing to report, my friends. If you want to find the meaning, stop chasing after so many things." He did not say there is no meaning. He said, stop chasing. The meaning is not hiding. It is sitting in the kitchen, waiting for you to notice. There is an old woman, and this is barely a story, more of a glimpse, who sweeps the courtyard of a temple every morning before dawn. She has been doing this for longer than anyone at the temple can remember. The monks change, the abbot changes, the seasons turn, but she is always there with her broom when the sky is still grey. One morning, a visitor, a man who had come to the temple seeking something, though he was not sure what, watched her sweep. She moved slowly, methodically, starting at the far corner and working her way toward the gate. The broom was bamboo, and it made a soft, rhythmic sound against the stone. Shh, like a whisper repeated until it becomes a song. "Who do you sweep for?" he asked. She looked up. Her face was creased with age, and her eyes were bright, and she did not seem surprised by the question. "For the courtyard," she said. "Not for the monks?" "No, not for the Buddha," she smiled. "The Buddha does not need a clean courtyard." "Not for yourself, then." "I do not need a clean courtyard either." "Then why do you sweep?" She looked at the broom in her hands, as if seeing it for the first time. Then she shrugged, a small, complete gesture that contained no philosophy and no pretension. "The courtyard is dirty," she said, "and I have a broom." The visitor stood there for a long time after she had moved on to the next corner. He had come to the temple looking for wisdom, for a teaching, for something that would make sense of his restlessness, and he had found a woman with a broom, who swept because the ground was dirty. No deeper reason, no hidden meaning, just the simplest possible response to the simplest possible situation. And he understood, standing there, that this was the teaching. That enough is not a quantity, it is a way of seeing. Now let us walk into a different kind of evening, darker, quieter, lit by a single flame. The candlemaker's workshop was at the end of a street that most people in the village had forgotten about. It was a small room, just big enough for a workbench, a shelf of molds, and a stove where he melted wax in a copper pot that had belonged to his father. The ceiling was low, blackened by decades of smoke, and in the evenings, when only one candle burned on the bench, the room seemed to fold in around itself, as if the darkness were another wall, closer than the others. A window at the back looked out onto a narrow yard, where he kept a woodpile and a rain barrel. In summer, moths would come to the window and press themselves against the glass, drawn by the single flame inside, and he would watch them, their papery wings tapping, and feel a strange kinship. He too had spent his life drawn to small fires. He was 72, and he had been making candles since he was 14. That was 58 years of wax under his fingernails, of burns on his wrists from the pouring, of the sweet, heavy smell of beeswax that had seeped into his clothes and his hair and the pores of his skin until he no longer smelled it himself, though his granddaughter once told him he smelled like a church, and he took it as a compliment. The molds were lined up on the shelf, brass cylinders, smooth from use, each one slightly different in diameter. He knew them by touch the way a pianist knows keys. The wax in the copper pot glowed amber when it was ready, and he poured it slowly, watching it fill the mold the way water fills a glass. First the thin skin along the walls, then the slow, heavy middle. The wick stood in the center, held in place by a small metal clip, and when the wax cooled, it contracted just slightly, pulling away from the edges of the mold with a faint, clean crack. His favorite sound. His grandson came to visit. One evening, a young man, 23, restless in the way that 23-year-olds are restless, already looking past the room he was standing in, toward the room he hoped to stand in next. "Grandfather," he said, leaning against the doorframe, "do you not regret spending your whole life making candles? Do you not wish you had done something bigger?" The old man did not answer right away. He was trimming a wick, holding the candle up to the light and cutting the charred end with a pair of small scissors. The flame wavered and then steadied. "What is bigger?" he asked. "I do not know. Traveling, building something, making a name." The old man set the candle down. "This candle," he said, "will go to someone's home tonight. It will sit on a dinner table, perhaps, or beside a bed. It will light a woman's face while she reads. It will light a child's room when the child is afraid of the dark. It will burn for 4 hours, maybe 5, and then it will be gone." He paused. "I have made 11 candles today. That is 11 rooms that will be lit tonight. 11 tables, 11 faces, 11 hours of not dark." He looked at his grandson. "I have been doing this for 58 years. I have lit 10,000 evenings. That is not a small life." The grandson said nothing. The flame between them burned steadily, casting their 2 shadows on the far wall, one tall and restless, one still. The Buddha once observed that there is no happiness higher than rest, not achievement, not conquest, not the accumulation of more. Rest, the happiness of a body that has stopped reaching and a mind that has stopped counting. The candle maker did not know this verse, had never read the Dhammapada, had never sat in meditation or visited a temple. But he knew rest. He knew the feeling of a finished candle cooling in his hands. He knew the quiet that comes after the last pour of the day, when the workshop is warm and the wax has set, and there is nothing left to do but sit with what you have made. The old man reached for a fresh candle, one of the 11 from today, and lit it from the one already burning. Then he handed it to his grandson. "Take this home," he said. "Put it somewhere you can see it, and when it burns down, come back. I will make you another." The grandson took the candle. He held it carefully, the way you hold something that might blow out. And as he walked home through the dark village, the flame lit a small circle around his feet, just enough to see the next step, not the one after that. And that, it turned out, was exactly enough light. There is a word for what the teacher found in her kitchen, and what the sweeper found in her courtyard, and what the candle maker found in his workshop. The Pali word is santuti. It is usually translated as contentment, but that English word carries a whiff of resignation, as if contentment means giving up on wanting more. Santuti is not resignation. It is not giving up. It is arriving. It is the moment you stop walking and realize you have been standing in the garden the whole time. It is not the absence of desire. It is the presence of enough. The Buddha also said this, and it is worth hearing slowly. He who has given up both victory and defeat, he, the contented, is happy, not the one who won, not the one who lost, the one who stopped keeping score. And tonight, lying here, perhaps you can feel this contentment, not as an idea, but as a physical fact. The blanket around you is warm. The pillow beneath your head is holding the weight of every thought you have carried today, and it is not complaining. The darkness in the room is not empty. It is soft, the way velvet is soft, the way the inside of a closed hand is soft. These are not small things. The breath entering your body right now is not a small thing. The fact that you are here, alive, resting, listening, that is not a small thing. You do not need to have done anything remarkable today to deserve this moment. You do not need to have been productive, or brave, or wise. You only need to be here, and you are. When you are ready, we will continue together. And sometimes, what feels broken is not broken at all. It is simply wearing its history on the outside. Like a bell with a crack that rings differently than it used to, but rings still. That is where we go next. We use the word so casually. Broken. A broken promise. A broken heart. A broken plan. We say it the way we say ruined, or done, or over. As if the breaking were the final sentence in a story that was supposed to end differently. But what if the breaking is not the end? What if it is simply a turn? The kind you cannot see around until you are already past it. Tonight, let us look at some things that broke and see what happened after. There is a tree, a very old one, an oak, the kind with a trunk so wide that two people could not reach around it, that stands at the edge of a field on the grounds of an old estate. No one remembers who planted it. It was already ancient when the estate was built, already tall when the first stones were laid. Its branches in summer cast a shadow so broad that you could lie beneath it at noon and not feel the sun at all. One autumn, lightning struck it, not a small strike, a direct hit that split the largest branch from the trunk with a sound that people in the village said was less like thunder and more like a groan, as if the tree was saying something it had held inside for a very long time. The branch fell across the field, heavy with leaves that were still green, still alive, not yet knowing they had been separated from their source. By morning, the branch had begun to wilt, and within a week it was dry, and the groundskeeper cut it into firewood and stacked it against the wall. The tree stood through the winter with a wound as wide as a doorway, pale wood exposed, raw, the inner rings visible for the first time in centuries. Snow gathered in the gap, rain darkened it. People passing said it was a shame, said the tree would probably die, said someone should cut it down before it fell on its own. But in spring, something happened. From the edge of the wound, from the very lip of the break, where the bark had been torn away, a new shoot appeared, thin, pale green, almost translucent. It grew not upward, the way the old branch had grown, but outward, reaching sideways toward the open field, toward the light that had not been available before the old branch fell. By summer it had leaves. By the following spring it had leaves and blossoms. And in the years that followed, the wound darkened and hardened, and became part of the trunk, and the new branch grew strong. And anyone who had not seen the lightning would not know that this tree had ever been struck at all, except that this one branch reached in a direction none of the others did, as if it had learned something from the breaking that the rest of the tree had not. She was a potter. She had been making pots and bowls and vases for 30 years. The same hands, the same wheel, the same kiln that her teacher had built in the yard behind the workshop, and that she had kept burning, season after season, like a heart that refused to stop. Her workshop was a simple room with a concrete floor, stained with slip and glaze in overlapping rings, like the cross-section of a very old tree. Shelves along one wall held finished pieces waiting for pickup, celadon bowls, teacups with rough lips, a set of dinner plates in a grey-blue that took her 2 years to perfect. The other wall held the pieces that did not work out. She kept them the way some people keep letters they will never send. Not because they were useful, but because throwing them away felt like throwing away the hours that went into them. A vase with a warped rim, a bowl whose glaze had crawled in the kiln, pulling away from the clay like a receding tide. A teapot whose handle cracked during cooling. The air in the workshop always smelled of wet earth. Not dirt, earth. The distinction mattered to her. Dirt was what you swept off the floor. Earth was what you put your hands into, the raw material of everything she made. When the kiln was firing, the smell changed. Drier, mineral, almost metallic, with a heat you could taste in the back of your throat. On cool autumn days, she would leave the workshop door open, and the wind would bring in leaves, yellow and orange, and the dark red of late maples, and they would settle on the floor among the clay dust like guests who had wandered in without an invitation. It was on one of those autumn days that she opened the kiln and found the vase. She had worked on it for a week. It was the largest piece she had attempted in years. Tall, narrow-necked, with a curve at the shoulder that she had smoothed with her thumb until it felt like the inside of a wrist. She had glazed it in a dark amber that she hoped would break to gold at the edges. But the kiln had other ideas. A hairline crack ran from the rim to the base, thin as a thread, visible only when the light caught it at a certain angle. She turned the vase in her hands. The glaze had fired beautifully. The amber had broken exactly as she hoped, pooling to black in the hollows and thinning to honey at the edges. But the crack was there, and a crack meant the vase could not hold water, which meant it could not hold flowers, which meant it was not a vase anymore. It was just a shape with a history of almost. She set it on the shelf with the other failures and sat down on the stool beside the wheel. Her hands were still dusty with kiln residue, and she pressed them flat against her thighs and looked at the cracked vase and thought about her marriage, which had ended 6 months ago, and which had also been something she had worked on for a very long time, that had cracked in a way she had not expected and could not repair. An old man appeared at the open door. He was the village mender, the man people called when a chair leg wobbled, or a clock stopped, or a fence post leaned too far. He carried a canvas bag of tools that clinked when he walked, and he had the kind of hands that looked like they had shaken hands with every object in the village at least once. He saw the vase on the shelf and walked toward it without asking. "May I?" he said, already reaching. She nodded. He turned the vase slowly, running one finger along the crack, the way a doctor runs a finger along a scar, not to fix it, just to understand it. "Beautiful glaze," he said. "It is cracked. I can see that. It cannot hold water." He looked at her. "Does everything need to hold water?" She did not answer. He set the vase down gently. "I fix things," he said. "Tables, watches, shutters. And I have learned something over the years. The things that break in interesting ways are more interesting than the things that never break at all." He tapped the crack with his fingernail. A light, precise tap, and the vase rang. Not like a bell, like something softer, something with a tremor in it, the way a voice trembles when it is telling the truth. "The crack is where the story lives," he said. "A perfect vase has no story. It was made, it was fired, it sits on a shelf. But this one went into the fire and came out changed. That is worth something." The old monk Bodhidharma, who carried Zen across mountains and oceans, once said, "Once you stop clinging and let things be, you will be free. even of birth and death. He was not talking about giving up. He was talking about the moment you stop insisting that things be other than they are. The moment you look at the crack and stop seeing a failure and start seeing a doorway. She did not throw the vase away. She moved it from the shelf of failures to the windowsill, where the afternoon light came in at a low angle, and the light, passing through the crack, cast a thin line of gold across the floor. Not because the crack was filled with gold, but because the light had found the one opening in an otherwise solid thing, and it had poured itself through. Tonight, if you are carrying something that feels cracked, a relationship that did not survive, a plan that fell apart, a version of yourself you thought you would be by now, perhaps you can hold it the way the old mender held the vase, not to fix it, not to pretend it is whole, just to turn it in the light and see if there is a story in the breaking. Shantideva, the great Indian sage who lived over 1,000 years ago, wrote, "Whatever befalls me, I shall not disturb my mental joy, for having been made unhappy, I shall not accomplish what I wish." He was not saying that pain does not matter. He was saying that the pain is not the whole story, and the joy that survives the breaking is a different kind of joy. Quieter, steadier, not dependent on things being perfect. It is the joy of the cracked vase on the windowsill, catching light it was never designed to catch. Now let us climb a little higher into the mountains, where the air is thin and the mornings begin in fog. There was a man who repaired temple bells. It was an unusual trade. There were perhaps 3 people in the country who still did it, and he traveled from monastery to monastery with a bag of hammers and files and a tuning fork that had belonged to his father, who had done the same work before him. He was 68, and his hearing, which one might expect to be damaged after decades of standing beside ringing bronze, was in fact extraordinary. He could hear the difference between a bell that was cracked and a bell that was merely cold. He could hear the age of a bell in its overtones. The way a crack in wood deepens over centuries, a bell's voice darkens and layers as the bronze settles into its molecular structure. The monastery sat on a ridge so high that clouds passed below it on some mornings, and the monks would look down at the white floor beneath them and feel, briefly, as though they had left the earth entirely. The buildings were old, stone foundations, wooden beams darkened by centuries of incense, tile roofs patched so many times that no 2 tiles were the same shade of grey. Moss grew in the joints between the stones, and in the rainy season it turned a green, so vivid it looked painted. The Thapchuang, the bell tower, stood at the highest point of the compound, a wooden structure open on all 4 sides so that the sound could travel unobstructed down the valley. He arrived at dawn. The fog was so thick he could not see the bell until he was standing directly beneath it. A bronze dome, taller than a man, green with patina, hanging from a beam as thick as his torso. He reached up and placed his palm flat against the surface. The bronze was cold, damp. He could feel the grain of the casting beneath his fingertips, slight ridges where the molten metal had cooled unevenly centuries ago. And there, near the waist of the bell, he felt it a line, barely perceptible, running diagonally across the surface like a river on a map. The crack. He tapped the bell with his knuckle, just once, softly, and listened. The sound was not wrong. It was different. There was the fundamental tone, deep and round, the way a healthy bell should sound, but riding above it, like a second voice singing a harmony no one had written, was an overtone, a wavering, almost human tremor that a perfect bell would not produce. The abbot was a precise man, the kind of monk who folded his robes in exact thirds and swept his quarters every morning before meditation. He stood at the foot of the tower and looked up at the crack with an expression that suggested he was looking at a personal insult. "It must be replaced," the abbot said. "A cracked bell does not ring true." The bell mender climbed down the ladder slowly. His knees were not what they had been. He wiped the bronze dust from his hands onto his trousers and looked at the abbot. With respect, he said, "It does ring true. It simply does not ring the way it rang before. That is the same thing." "It is not." He held up the tuning fork, a plain steel instrument, unremarkable, and struck it against the heel of his boot. A single pure note hummed in the foggy air. "This is a perfect tone," he said. "It has no history, no weather, no seasons of being struck by the mallet at dawn and dusk. It is pure and it is empty." He let the fork die in his hand. "Your bell has been ringing for 300 years, every morning, every evening, through storms and dry seasons, and the prayers of 1,000 monks. The crack does not erase that. It adds to it. The overtone you hear, that wavering, that is the bell's history. It rings with its own life now. A new bell would ring perfectly, but it would ring without memory." The abbot said nothing for a long time. The fog moved between them like a slow animal, thick and white, smelling of pine and wet stone. "You are saying we should keep a broken bell," the abbot said. The bell mender smiled. It was a patient smile, the kind that comes from having had this conversation many times with many precise men. "I am saying that what you call broken, the bell might call experienced. The old Zen master Papanca taught that when you no longer bother about rising thoughts, not trying to stop them, or not to stop them, that is the unborn Buddha mind." The bell mender had never heard of Papanca, but he understood, in the way that people who work with their hands sometimes understand things that scholars miss, that wholeness does not mean the absence of cracks. It means the presence of everything, including the cracks. The abbot turned and walked back toward the meditation hall. He did not give an order. He did not say keep it or replace it. He simply walked away. And the bell mender understood this to be a kind of permission. The kind that comes not from agreement, but from the exhaustion of argument. The bell stayed, and that morning, when the young monk, whose job it was to ring the dawn bell, struck the mallet against the bronze, the sound that rolled down the mountainside was not perfect. It was something else. It was full. It carried the fundamental tone and the overtone together, the way a river carries its current and its eddies at the same time. And the fog caught the sound and held it, and released it slowly, so that the monks in the valley below heard the bell not as a single strike, but as a long, slow unfurling, as if the sound itself were waking up. There is a word in the old language, dukkha. It is the Buddha's word for suffering, and it is one of the most misunderstood words in any language. People hear it and think, life is pain. But that is not what it means. Dukkha originally referred to a wheel that is off-center, a cart wheel with an axle that does not sit quite right, so that every rotation has a wobble, a bump, a small irregularity. Not agony, not despair, just the slight, persistent unevenness of being alive. The crack in the vase, the overtone in the bell, the wobble in the wheel that tells you it is turning. And knowing the sound, that is the first step. Not fixing it, not replacing the wheel, just hearing the bump and thinking, ah, there it is. The wobble, the proof that I am moving. The body you are lying in right now carries its own cracks. the knees that remember every staircase, the back that holds the shape of every chair, the shoulders that have carried what? Children, groceries, worry years. These are not damage, they are records. The body is not a machine that wears out. It is a bell that has been ringing for decades, and the sound it makes now, the way it settles into the mattress, the way the breath catches slightly before it releases, the way the hip reminds you it is there. This is the body's overtone, its history, and it is not a sound that needs to be silenced. It is a sound that needs to be heard. When you are ready, we will continue together. And some things cannot be rushed. Seeds, bread, grief, understanding, they all ask for the same thing: time. That is where we are going next. There is a kind of waiting that is not waiting at all. It looks like patience from the outside, but from the inside, it feels more like trust. A quiet agreement with time that says, I will not rush you, and you will not forget me. Let us rest here, with that kind of waiting for a while. Take a slow breath, let the body settle, and let us see what patience feels like, when it is not a discipline, but a gift. She had been fast her whole life, fast hands, fast decisions, fast walker, fast talker. She was the kind of woman who threaded a needle on the first try, who could hem a skirt during a commercial break, who cut fabric without measuring, because her eye was measurement enough. She had learned to sew from her grandmother at the age of 9, and by 12 she was altering her own school uniforms, and by 20 she was making wedding dresses. Whole wedding dresses, from the first pin to the last button, in 5 days flat. Her hands were her pride. They were also, she would say with a laugh, her only real talent. The stroke came on a Thursday afternoon in April, while she was ironing a collar. It was small. The doctors called it minor, a word that seemed almost insulting given that it arrived like a thief and left with half her speed. The right side of her body, which had been her leading side, her cutting side, her threading the needle on the first try side, went soft. Not paralyzed, the doctors were careful to distinguish, but slow. The signals still traveled from brain to hand, but they traveled the way letters travel by post instead of by phone, arriving eventually, but without urgency. Her daughter helped her home after the rehabilitation. 6 weeks of exercises that felt like learning to write with the wrong hand, of squeezing rubber balls and stacking plastic rings, and being praised for things she had done without thinking since she was a child. The therapist was kind and young and used the word progress, the way weather forecasters use partly sunny, technically accurate, but missing the point. The house was the same. The hallway smelled of the lavender sachets she kept in the linen closet. The kitchen clock still ran 2 minutes fast. The sewing room was the same. The old Singer machine on its table by the window. The pincushion shaped like a tomato that her grandmother had made. The bolts of fabric stacked against the wall in colors that ranged from midnight navy to the pale peach of a summer sunrise. The scissors hung on a hook beside the machine, and the measuring tape was coiled on the shelf like a sleeping snake. And the thimble, her grandmother's thimble, brass, worn smooth on the crown, sat on the windowsill where the morning light found it first. Everything was the same except her. She sat in the chair by the lamp on the first evening home and picked up a piece she had been working on before the stroke. A simple blouse, navy cotton, half finished. The needle was where she had left it, threaded, tucked into the fabric near the second buttonhole. She pulled it out and held it between the thumb and forefinger of her right hand. The hand trembled. Not much, just enough that the needle wavered, and the point, instead of finding the exact spot she intended, landed 2 millimeters to the left. She pulled the thread through. The stitch was crooked. She looked at it the way a musician looks at a wrong note, with a mixture of disbelief and recognition. Before the stroke, she could make 40 stitches in a minute. Tiny, even, nearly invisible stitches that people mistook for machine work. Now 5 minutes had passed, and she had made 6. 6 stitches, each one slightly different from the last. Each one requiring the kind of concentration she had never had to give before. The needle felt different in her hand, not heavier, but more present, as if it had gained a personality. Her daughter's voice echoed in her head, something she had said at the hospital. "Mom, it is okay to slow down. You have been running for 66 years. She had smiled at the time and thought, "You do not understand. Slow is not a choice. Slow is what happens when you lose." But tonight, in the lamplight, with the clock ticking on the wall, and the dark pressing against the windows, and the navy cotton warm across her thighs, she looked at the 6 stitches and noticed something she had not expected. They were beautiful. Not beautiful the way her old stitches were beautiful. Uniform, mechanical, efficient. Beautiful the way handwriting is beautiful. Each one slightly different. Each one carrying the specific pressure of that specific moment. This tremor, this breath, this angle of wrist. The thread did not lie flat against the fabric in a straight line. It curved, just barely, the way a path curves when someone walks it slowly enough to notice the view. The mind, the Buddha taught, precedes all things. What we think, we become. And perhaps what was happening here in this small room with its yellow light was not a loss at all. The mind that had preceded her fast hands had been a mind of efficiency. Get it done, get it right, move on. The mind that preceded these slow hands was different. It was a mind that had been forced to pay attention. And attention, it turned out, had its own kind of beauty. She put the fabric down and flexed her hand. Slowly, opening and closing the fingers, feeling the pull of tendons that were learning a new speed. The cat, who had been sleeping on the arm of the chair, opened one eye and looked at her with the particular indifference that cats reserve for human struggles. She picked up the fabric again. She made 12 more stitches before she put the blouse down for the night. 18 stitches in an evening. It would take her 2 weeks to finish what she used to finish in 2 days. But when she held the fabric up to the lamp, the stitches caught the light in a way she had never seen before, each one casting its own tiny shadow, each one distinct, each one proof that a human hand had been here, moving slowly, caring greatly, refusing to rush. Zen Master Dogen, who founded an entire tradition on the premise that practice and enlightenment are not separate, once wrote, "In stillness, mind and object merge in realization and go beyond enlightenment." He was not talking about meditation alone. He was talking about any moment in which the gap between the doer and the doing disappears. When the seamstress becomes the stitch, when the gardener becomes the soil, when the sleeper becomes the breath. Stillness is not the absence of movement. It is movement so attentive that it forgets itself. Tonight, if you have been impatient with yourself, with how long something is taking, how slow the healing has been, how far the progress seems from where you wanted to be by now, perhaps you can hold that impatience the way the seamstress held her needle, gently, without forcing, with the understanding that some things cannot be stitched quickly, and the slow stitches are the ones that hold. There is an old Zen story, one of the shortest and most famous, about a monk who came to the master Joshu and said, "I have just entered the monastery. Please teach me." Joshu said, "Have you eaten your rice porridge?" The monk said, "Yes, I have." Joshu said, "Then go wash your bowl." And the monk was enlightened. That is the whole story. There is nothing hidden in it, no secret code, no deeper meaning waiting to be excavated. It is exactly what it appears to be. Have you done the thing that was in front of you? Then do the next thing that is in front of you. The monk came looking for the great teaching, the transformative insight, the key that would unlock enlightenment. And Joshu pointed him to the sink because the bowl was dirty, and a dirty bowl does not need philosophy. It needs water. The bowl is dirty. Wash the bowl. The needle is in your hand. Make the next stitch. The breath is here. Breathe it. Patience, it turns out, is not a grand virtue. It is not the heroic endurance of great suffering. It is the willingness to wash the bowl, to make the stitch, to do the smallest possible thing, and then the next to smallest possible thing, and to trust that the accumulation of small things is how large things get done. The way a river carves a canyon, not by force, but by showing up every day and flowing. Now let us walk into the rain. He had been planting bamboo on the hillside behind his house for as long as anyone in the village could remember. The hill was steep, not dramatically so, but enough that the rain, when it came, ran down in small streams that carved channels in the red clay. He had chosen bamboo because bamboo holds soil. Its roots spread underground in a network so dense that the earth, once threaded through with them, becomes almost impossible to wash away. But bamboo is slow. A new shoot takes 3 to 5 years to reach full height, and the root network takes a decade to mature. He was planting patience into the hillside, one shoot at a time. He was 75, and he moved through the bamboo grove with the kind of ease that comes from knowing a place by feel, where the ground dipped, where the roots surfaced, where the older stalks had grown thick enough to lean against. The grove smelled of wet green, not the sharp green of cut grass, but the deep, living green of things that are still growing. When the wind came through, the bamboo bent and whispered, a sound like 1,000 pages turning at once. And when the rain fell on the leaves, it made a tapping so fine and rapid it sounded less like water and more like applause. His hands were calloused from the digging, the particular calluses that come from gripping a spade handle in clay soil, thick pads on the palms, and a permanent curve to the fingers. He carried a canvas bag with young shoots, each one wrapped in damp burlap, each one about the length of his forearm, pale and slightly fuzzy where the new growth had begun. A young man from the village, a neighbor's son, perhaps 30, came up the hill one afternoon, stepping carefully between the rows. "Uncle," he said, using the respectful term that everyone in the village used for old men, regardless of blood relation. "Why do you plant these? They will not be tall for 10 years. You will not see them full grown." The old man was kneeling in the mud, his trousers dark with rain, pressing a shoot into a hole he had dug with his hands. He did not look up. "You are right," he said. "I will not." "Then why do you do it?" "Because someone planted the ones I am standing under right now." He gestured behind him, where the older bamboo, the ones he had planted 30 years ago, rose so high their tops disappeared into the low cloud. Their trunks were thick now, the diameter of a man's wrist, and the green had deepened to a color that was almost black in the rain. Between them, the ground was covered in fallen leaves, narrow, curved, like tiny boats run aground. And the air between the stalks had a quality of stillness that the open hillside did not, as if the bamboo had created its own room, its own climate, its own quiet. The rain ran down their stalks in thin rivers. I did not plant those for myself either. I planted them for the wind. For the wind. I am not planting for my eyes, he said. He pressed the soil around the new shoot, firming it with both hands, the way you press a blanket around a child. I am planting for the wind that will pass through it, one morning, when I am no longer here. Someone will walk up this hill and hear the sound of the wind in bamboo they did not plant, and they will feel something they cannot name. That is enough. The young man stood in the rain for a while, watching the old man work. He did not offer to help. It was not that kind of visit. He had come with a question, and he was waiting for the question to finish answering itself. But does it not make you sad? The young man asked after a while. Knowing you will not be here. The old man patted the soil one final time and stood up, slowly, one hand on his knee. He looked at the young man the way a tree might look at the rain, without urgency, without complaint. When I was your age, he said, I wanted to see everything I planted grow. I wanted to sit under my own shade. Now I understand that the planting is the shade. The digging is the rest. You do not need to wait for the tree to grow to feel its coolness. You can feel it in the dirt, under your fingernails, right now, while the shoot is still small and the hill is still bare. Bodhidharma, the fierce-eyed monk who brought Zen from India to China, once said, to give up yourself without regret is the greatest charity. And perhaps the old man on the hillside understood this, not as a teaching, but as a way of living. To plant what you will not see, to do work whose harvest belongs to someone else, to give your mornings to a hillside that will outlast you by centuries. That is not sacrifice. That is trust. Trust that the world will continue, and that your small contribution, this shoot, this hole, this pressing of wet earth, will be woven into something larger than your life. He stood up slowly, knees protesting, and brushed the clay from his hands. He put the remaining shoots back in the canvas bag and slung it over his shoulder. On the way down the hill, he paused at a spot where 3 old bamboo stalks grew close together, forming a kind of doorway. He reached out and placed his palm flat against the nearest one. The surface was smooth and cool and faintly ridged, like a column in an old building. He could feel the rain running down it, in thin streams, and beneath that, if he pressed hard enough, something else, a faint vibration, the tremor of the whole stalk swaying in the wind above, transmitted through the wood to his hand. The bamboo was alive, it was moving, and it had been doing this long before he arrived, and would continue long after he left. The rain was lighter now. Through the older bamboo, he could hear it, the wind, moving through the stalks he had planted when he was the young man's age. It made a sound like breathing, like the hill itself was breathing. And for a moment, standing in the rain with mud on his trousers and a bag of young shoots at his feet, he was not 75. He was not any age at all. He was just a man on a hill, listening to the sound of something he had made, which was also the sound of something he had let go. The Pali word for patience is khanti. It does not mean what we usually mean by patience. The white-knuckled endurance of sitting in traffic, the forced smile when things take too long. Khanti is closer to willingness. The willingness to let something take as long as it needs. The willingness to plant a bamboo shoot you will never sit under. The willingness to make a stitch that takes 5 minutes instead of 5 seconds, and to find it beautiful anyway. And the breath you are breathing right now, this breath, not the next one, cannot be hurried. You cannot inhale faster and call it a better breath. You cannot exhale more efficiently and arrive at rest sooner. The breath takes the time it takes. The lungs fill at the rate they fill. The body releases at its own pace, in its own rhythm, following a clock that has nothing to do with the one on the wall. Perhaps, right now, you can feel that rhythm, not as something you are controlling, but as something you are being carried by. The way the bamboo is carried by the wind, the way the needle is carried by the hand, the way the night carries you toward morning, one breath at a time, without rushing, without falling behind. When you are ready, we will continue together. And perhaps the most sacred thing is not the extraordinary moment, not the lightning bolt or the great revelation. Perhaps it is the ordinary one. The cup of tea, the swept floor, the afternoon light. That is where we are going next. Most of us spend our lives looking for the extraordinary, the moment that changes everything, the insight that rewrites the story, the sunrise that makes us cry. And sometimes those moments come, but more often, the sacred thing is already here. In the cup of tea, in the creak of the floor, in the sound of rain on a window you have listened to 1,000 times. Let us look there tonight. Take a slow breath and let us see what has been hiding in plain sight. She had been making tea for other people for 47 years. The shop was hers, a small wooden building on a road between 2 villages, with a counter that seated 6 and a kitchen in the back, no larger than a closet. She had built it with her husband in the year they married, when she was 23 and he was 25. And the wood had aged the way they had aged, slowly, gracefully, with lines that deepened each year without breaking. He had died 5 years ago, in the autumn during the season, when the persimmons in the yard behind the shop turned the color of sunset. She had served tea the next morning, not because she was brave, and not because she was numb, but because the water was already boiling when she woke up, and the cups were already on the counter, and the first customer, an old farmer who came every morning at 6 without fail, was already at the door. The day did not ask her permission to begin. It simply began, and she went with it. The shop smelled the way it had always smelled, of jasmine tea, and the charcoal she burned in a small iron brazier beneath the counter to keep the water hot. The charcoal gave off a dry, woody warmth that you could feel on your shins if you sat close enough, and the jasmine floated above it like a second layer of heat, sweeter, thinner, the kind of smell that you stop noticing after an hour, but miss the moment you leave. The cups were green, a deep matte green that she had chosen decades ago because it made the tea look golden, and they were worn smooth on the rims where 10,000 lips had pressed. In the mornings when the door was open to the road, the light came in at a low angle and turned the steam from the kettle into something visible, a slow, rising column that twisted and dissolved like a thought you cannot quite hold. The sound of the kettle was constant, a low hum, not quite boiling, the sound of water thinking about becoming steam. Outside, birds she could not name sang in the tree by the road, and the road itself was quiet at this hour, empty except for the occasional bicycle and the farmer, who was drinking his first cup in silence. One morning, a younger woman, a traveler, perhaps 40, with a backpack and a guidebook, and the particular restlessness of someone who has been moving for a long time, sat down at the counter and ordered tea. "You have been here a long time," the traveler said, looking around the shop with the careful eyes of someone cataloguing experience. 47 years, she said, pouring. "Do you not want to travel, to see the world, the mountains, the coast, the cities?" The traveler said this kindly, without condescension, but with the genuine puzzlement of someone for whom staying still was a form of surrender. The tea maker set the cup down on the counter. The steam rose between them. "I have seen the world," she said. The traveler smiled politely. "From here. From here." She gestured toward the door, where the morning light was shifting, the angle steepening as the sun climbed, the shadow of the tree shortening on the road. "This light is different every morning. In January it is thin and white and comes in flat. In June it is golden and thick, and you can almost chew it. In October it is the color of the persimmons in the yard, and it does not last long, and I find myself watching it the way you watch a guest who is about to leave." She paused. "I have never seen the same afternoon twice. That is enough travel for one life." The traveler held her cup with both hands and said nothing for a while. The tea maker wiped the counter with a cloth, a gesture she had made perhaps 100,000 times. Slow, circular, not cleaning so much as conversing with the wood. Zen Master Dogen wrote, centuries ago, that there is no gap between ordinary life and the way. The sacred is not hidden behind the ordinary, waiting to be discovered. The ordinary is the sacred, wearing work clothes, smelling of tea and charcoal, wiping the counter one more time, because the counter is there and the cloth is in your hand. The traveler finished her tea, left a few coins on the counter and shouldered her backpack. At the door she turned. "I think you may have traveled further than I have," she said. The tea maker smiled and poured herself a cup, something she rarely did before noon, but the morning seemed to call for it. She held the cup with both hands and watched the light move across the wooden floor, inch by inch, like a slow animal crossing a room. The shadow of the kettle on the counter shifted. A bird outside changed its song. The farmer, who had been sitting at the far end of the counter through the whole conversation, set his empty cup down with a small click. He did not comment on what the traveler had said or what the tea maker had answered. He simply folded his hands on the counter and closed his eyes for a moment, the way he did every morning after his second cup, a habit so old it had become invisible. When he opened them, he looked at the tea maker and said, "Same time tomorrow." "Same time tomorrow," she said. He stood, left his coins beside the cup, and walked out into the morning. His footsteps on the gravel outside faded slowly, and then there was only the kettle and the birds and the creak of wood expanding in the warming air. She sat with all of it. The warmth in her hands, the smell of jasmine, the sound of the farmer's bicycle starting up on the road outside, the creak of the old building settling into another day. And she did not need to be anywhere else. How many afternoons have you lived through without noticing them? Not bad afternoons, not the ones marked by grief or joy or crisis. The ordinary ones, the ones that arrived and left without announcement, the way mail arrives, the way seasons turn, the way the light crosses your kitchen floor each day at a slightly different angle, and you never quite look. This is not a scolding, it is an invitation, because the afternoon you are in right now, this dark one, this quiet one, this one where you are lying down and listening, this is one of those afternoons. And it is here, and it will not come again. Not this exact one, with this exact breath, this exact weight of your body against this exact surface. There is an old carpenter, very old now, though his hands are still steady, who spends his mornings in a workshop behind his house, planing wood. He has been doing this for so long that he no longer thinks about it the way one thinks about work. It is closer to what happens when you hum a song without deciding to hum. The body takes over, and the mind goes somewhere quiet, and the hands move because they remember. The plane is a simple tool, a blade set in a block of wood, meant to shave the surface of a board until it is flat and smooth. Each stroke removes a curl of wood, so thin you can see light through it. The curls pile up around his feet like fallen petals, pale and fragrant, smelling of cedar or pine depending on the wood and the sound the plane makes. A long, steady shah is the sound of something being revealed, because planing is not adding, it is taking away, removing the rough, the uneven, the excess, until what remains is the thing itself, the grain, the color, the shape that was always there beneath the surface. He does not call it prayer. He does not call it meditation. He does not call it anything. He just planes the wood, and the wood becomes smooth, and the curls fall, and the morning passes. And when he stops for tea, his hands smell of cedar, and his mind is clear, and he does not know why, and he does not need to know. Sometimes his wife, who died 11 years ago, used to stand in the doorway and watch him work. She never interrupted. She said once that watching him plane was the calmest thing she knew, calmer than the sea, calmer than sleep. He did not understand what she meant at the time. Now, alone in the workshop with the sawdust settling around him like snow, he thinks he does. The calm was not in the watching, it was in the wood, in the sound, in the way the blade found the grain and followed it without argument, without negotiation. Just one surface meeting another, and both of them agreeing on the direction. Now let us step into a different kind of morning, cooler, earlier, with dew still on the ground. She was 78, and she had been sweeping the same path in the same park every morning for as long as the neighbors could remember. The park was small, just a square of grass surrounded by maples, with a stone path that wound from the gate to a bench at the center and back again. In autumn, the maples dropped their leaves with the generosity that only trees possess. Not grudgingly, not one at a time, but in great sweeping handfuls, so that by morning the path was buried beneath a carpet of red and gold, and the particular shade of brown that leaves turn when they have given up everything they have. She arrived before dawn, always before dawn. She liked the park when it was still dark, when the streetlights caught the dew on the leaves and made them glitter, when the air was cold enough to see her breath. And the silence was so complete she could hear the sound of her own broom. A bamboo broom, homemade, the bristles cut from a stand of bamboo behind her apartment building. The handle was smooth from years of grip, and it had taken the shape of her hands, curved where her fingers curved, worn thin where her palm pressed hardest. She swept the way water flows, starting at the highest point and moving downhill, gathering the leaves into long, slow rows that she would later push to the edge of the path and leave for the groundskeeper to collect. Each stroke was deliberate, not hurried, not slow, just right, the speed of a breath, the speed of a hand smoothing a sheet. Her granddaughter came to visit one autumn morning, a young woman in her 20s, still carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who is trying to figure out what to do with her life. She found her grandmother already in the park, halfway down the path, sweeping. "Grandmother," she said, sitting down on the bench, pulling her coat tighter. Why do you do this? Tomorrow the leaves will fall again. The path will be covered by noon. The old woman did not stop sweeping. Yes, she said, it will. Then, what is the point? What is the point of washing your face? It will get dirty again. The granddaughter smiled. But it was a thin smile, the kind that acknowledges a point without accepting it. She sat on the bench and watched her grandmother move down the path, stroke by stroke, the leaves parting before the broom like a curtain being drawn open. And somewhere between the third stroke and the 20th, something shifted in the way she was seeing. She had come to the park expecting to find her grandmother doing a chore. Something tedious, repetitive, pointless. But watching now, really watching, the way you watch a dancer or a calligrapher, she saw something different. The old woman was not sweeping. She was breathing. Each stroke of the broom was an exhale. Each lift was an inhale. The rhythm was so steady, so even, so perfectly matched to the rise and fall of her grandmother's chest, that the sweeping and the breathing had become the same thing. The broom was not a tool. It was a metronome, and the woman holding it was not working. She was meditating. She had been meditating here every morning for decades, and she had never used that word, and she did not need to. Dogen, who understood this better than almost anyone, said simply, "When you wash the rice, wash the rice. When you sit, sit. When you eat, eat." He was not giving instructions. He was describing what happens when you stop dividing your life into sacred and ordinary. When you stop believing that enlightenment is somewhere else, in some other activity, at some other time. It is here. It is in the rice. It is in the broom. It is in the act of sweeping a path that will be covered again by noon. The granddaughter stood up from the bench. She walked to the storage box by the gate, where the park kept its tools, and took out a second broom, older, stiffer, with bristles that splayed at the ends. She did not say anything. She just started sweeping, a few meters behind her grandmother, matching her rhythm as best she could. They swept in silence for 20 minutes. The sun came up, the dew dried, the leaves gathered into rows. A jogger passed through the park and nodded at them. Two women with brooms, one old and one young, moving in the same rhythm. And the jogger slowed her pace for a moment, as if passing through a church, before continuing on. When they finished, the path was clear. Not permanently, not even for the whole day, but for now. The grandmother leaned her broom against the gate and reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out 2 persimmons. Small, bright, the kind that are sweet only when they are so ripe they are almost translucent, and handed one to her granddaughter without a word. They ate standing at the gate, the juice running down their chins, and the sweetness of the fruit and the cold of the morning air and the smell of damp leaves were all one thing, and that one thing had no name. The granddaughter understood something she could not have learned from any book, that the deepest conversation she would ever have with her grandmother had just happened, and neither of them had said a word. The Pali word for what the tea maker and the carpenter and the sweeper all share is sati. It is the word we translate as mindfulness, and it has become, in recent years, a very busy word, attached to apps and programs and corporate retreats and breathing exercises. But sati is not a technique to master. It is not something you add to your life. It is what happens when you stop doing everything else, when you stop planning and reviewing and worrying and rehearsing, and you simply do the thing that is in front of you. Pour the tea, Plane the wood, sweep the leaves, with all of yourself, with nothing held back, with nothing saved for later. Papanca, the great Zen master who spoke to farmers and fishermen in language they could understand, once said, "Trying to suppress delusion is delusion too." Delusions have no original existence. They are only things you create yourself by indulging in discrimination. And perhaps this is the gentlest way to say it. You do not need to clear the mind to find the sacred. The mind is already sacred. The delusions are already sacred. The worrying is already sacred. Not because worrying is good, but because it is happening. And anything that is happening is real. And anything that is real is worthy of attention. And attention, fully given, is the only prayer there is. This moment, the dark room, the sound of this voice, the weight of your body against the bed, this is not preparation for something sacred. This is the sacred thing. You have not missed it. You are not behind. You are lying in the middle of it right now, the way the tea maker sits in the middle of her shop, the way the sweeper stands in the middle of her path, and nothing more is required. When you are ready, we will continue together. And there is one more journey tonight, perhaps the most important, the journey of setting something down that you have been carrying for a very long time, a weight you know by name, even if you have never spoken it aloud. That is where we are going next. There is something you have been carrying. You may not think of it as heavy. It has been with you so long it feels like part of the body, like a bone you were born with, rather than a stone you picked up along the way. It might be a grudge. It might be a regret. It might be something you said to someone years ago that you cannot unsay, or something someone said to you that you cannot unhear. Tonight, let us look at what happens when we set it down. Take a slow breath, and let us begin with a woman who writes letters she never sends. She had been a seamstress for most of her life, the kind who worked from home, who measured by eye and cut by feel, whose living room smelled permanently of cotton and the warm metal of a running iron. She was 69 now, and she lived alone in a house that had held 3, and then 2, and now 1. The rooms shrinking, not in size but in sound, the way a theatre shrinks when the audience leaves. Her daughter had stopped speaking to her 8 years ago. The reason was specific and complicated and old, the way reasons between mothers and daughters always are, a thing. Said at a wedding, a silence that lasted too long, a door closed with a weight that was not quite a slam, but was worse than a slam, because it was deliberate. She had replayed the moment so many times that it had worn smooth in her memory, like a stone in a riverbed, until she could no longer feel its edges. Every night, after the dishes were done and the house had settled into its particular brand of quiet, the refrigerator humming, the radiator ticking, the clock in the hallway marking time for no one, she sat down at the small desk by the window and wrote a letter. The desk was old, cherry wood, with a surface scratched by decades of pen pressure. She used the same stationery, cream paper with a faint blue line, the kind sold in packets of 50 at the shop on the corner. The pen was a fountain pen her husband had given her on their 30th anniversary, and the ink was blue-black, and each letter began the same way. Dear Ling. She wrote about the weather, about the plum tree in the yard that had bloomed early this year, about the cat from next door that sat on her windowsill every morning and stared at her with an expression she could not read. She wrote about what she had cooked for dinner and what she had seen on the walk to the market, and how the light in the kitchen reminded her of the light in the apartment they had lived in when Ling was small. That particular golden light of late afternoon that made everything look like a painting of itself. She never wrote about the argument. She never wrote, "I am sorry," though she was. She never wrote, "Please come home," though she wanted to. The letters were not about repair. They were about presence. They were her way of saying, "I am still here. The door is still open. The pen is still in my hand." Let us leave her there for a moment. The pen moving across the paper, the ink drying in the lamplight, and walk to a riverbank where the morning is just beginning. He was a potter, and he was 74, and every year, on the first morning of spring, he carried one bowl down to the river and broke it. Not just any bowl, the best one, the one he had spent the most time on, the one whose glaze had come out exactly right, the one he would have kept on the highest shelf if keeping were the point. The river was narrow here, no wider than a road, and it moved slowly over smooth stones that had been polished by centuries of water. The banks were lined with willows whose branches dragged in the current, like fingers trailing from a boat. In the early morning, mist rose from the surface and hung in the air at waist height, so that walking to the river felt like wading into a shallow cloud. The stones beneath his sandals were cold and damp, and he could feel each one through the thin soles. Round, irregular, alive with the cold of water that had come down from the mountains in the dark. He held the bowl in both hands. It was the size of a melon, a rice bowl, round-bottomed, glazed in a deep blue-green that shifted color depending on the light. In the morning mist, it looked almost black. In full sun, it would have looked like the sea. He had fired it 3 times to get the color right, and the rim was so thin he could see the shadow of his thumb through it. Now let us return to the seamstress, the neighbor, a woman of 80, small and sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who noticed everything and commented on most of it, came by one evening with a jar of pickled radishes and stayed for tea. She sat at the kitchen table and watched the seamstress pour, and her eyes moved, as they always did, around the room, cataloguing. They landed on the desk by the window, on the stack of letters, perhaps 200 of them now, tied with a ribbon, sitting beside the lamp like a small monument. "Who do you write to?" the neighbor asked. "My daughter. Do you send them?" "No." The neighbor picked up her tea and blew on it, a slow, careful breath, the breath of someone who has burned her tongue enough times to be patient. "Then, why do you write them?" The seamstress set the teapot down. She looked at the stack of letters, the way you look at a garden you have been tending for years. Not with pride, exactly, but with the quiet recognition that something has been growing here, even if no one else can see it. "Because each letter takes a little of the weight," she said. "Not all of it, not even most of it, but a little. And after 200 letters, the weight is different. It is still there, but I can carry it now. Before, it carried me." The Buddha taught in one of the oldest verses preserved in the Dhammapada, "Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is an eternal law." He was not offering advice. He was describing physics, the physics of the heart, which operates by laws as reliable as gravity. The seamstress did not know this verse, but she understood the physics. Each letter was not an act of forgiveness. Not yet, perhaps not ever. It was an act of practice, the way a musician practices scales not to perform them, but to train the hands to move without resistance. She was training her heart to hold her daughter's name without flinching. And after 200 nights, The flinching had become something else, something softer, something closer to an ache than a wound. And an ache, she had discovered, was something you could live beside. Forgiveness is not an event. It is not the dramatic moment in which you decide to let go, and the music swells and the credits roll. It is a practice quiet, repetitive, unglamorous. It is writing a letter you do not send. It is setting the pen down and folding the paper and placing it on the stack and turning off the lamp and doing it again tomorrow and the next night and the next, until the act of writing becomes its own kind of release, not because the pain is gone, but because you have found a place to put it that is not your body. Now let us return to the river. The potter's grandson, a boy of 19, still young enough to believe that beautiful things should be preserved, stood on the bank and watched his grandfather hold the bowl over the water. "That is the best one you made this year," the boy said. "Why would you break it?" The old man turned the bowl in his hands one more time. The mist was thinning now, and the first light caught the glaze and turned it from black to blue-green to something that had no name. The color of deep water seen from above. "Because it is the best one," he said. "I do not understand. When I was young, I kept everything. Every bowl, every cup, every plate. I filled shelves with them. I was proud of them. And then one year, the shelf collapsed." He smiled at the memory. Everything I had made over 10 years, shattered on the floor. And I stood there in the pieces and I felt, this is strange. I felt lighter, as if the shelves had been holding me up instead of the other way around. He looked at his grandson. "I do not break this bowl because I do not love it. I break it because I do. The one I love most is the one I must learn to release. Otherwise, the love becomes a shelf, and the shelf becomes a weight, and the weight becomes a wall between me and the next thing I am supposed to make." The great Indian sage Shantideva, who lived over 1,000 years ago, and whose words still carry the weight of lived experience, wrote, "All the suffering in the world arises from seeking happiness for oneself. All the happiness in the world arises from seeking happiness for others." The potter would not have put it that way. He would have said something simpler, something about how a bowl exists to be used, not to be kept, and how the river has more use for the clay than his shelf does. But the teaching is the same. Release is not loss. It is returning something to the current that made it. The boy opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He looked at his grandfather's hands, thick, scarred, the knuckles swollen from decades of wedging clay, and at the bowl, which sat in those hands, the way a bird sits in a nest, perfectly held, perfectly free to leave. "Will you make another one?" the boy asked. "I will make a different one," the old man said. "That is not the same thing." He raised the bowl above his head and brought it down against the largest stone on the bank. The sound was sharp and clean, not a crash but a crack, like a branch breaking in frost. The pieces fell into the shallow water, 5, 6, 7 fragments of blue-green glaze, and the current took them, slowly, turning them over, carrying them downstream. He watched until the last piece disappeared around the bend. Then he stood there for a while longer, his hands empty, the mist burning off, the sun finding the water and turning it to silver. A heron, which had been standing motionless downstream, lifted off with a single heavy wing beat and crossed the river at the height of the willows. The old man watched it go and felt the particular lightness that comes after you have given something away. Not the lightness of having less, but the lightness of having made room. The seamstress wrote her last letter on a Thursday in November. She did not know it would be the last one when she sat down. She wrote about the plum tree again, bare now, its branches like dark pencil lines against the grey sky. She wrote about the cat, who had stopped coming to the window, and about the new family that had moved in across the street, and about the first frost of the season, which had turned the grass in the yard white and brittle, so that walking across it in the morning sounded like walking on paper. She signed the letter the way she always did, just her name. No love, no your mother, just the name, because the name was enough and always had been. She folded it, she placed it on the stack, and then she did something she had not done before. She untied the ribbon, took the whole stack, all 212 letters, and placed them in a cardboard box. She closed the box. She put the box on the shelf in the hallway closet beside the winter scarves and the umbrella she never used, and she turned off the desk lamp. The room was dark except for the streetlight coming through the window. She stood there for a moment, her hands at her sides, and felt something she had not felt in 8 years. Not peace, that was too large a word. Something smaller, something like the feeling you get when you finally set down a bag you have been carrying up a long hill. The shoulders drop, the spines straightens, the hands open, and you realize that the pain in your arms was not the hill. It was the holding. She slept that night without dreaming. For the first time in 8 years, the night was just the night, dark, quiet, and asking nothing of her. In the morning, she would make tea and sit at the kitchen table and notice that the desk by the window looked different, without the stack of letters. Emptier, yes, but also larger, as if the surface had been waiting beneath all that paper for years, patient as a field under snow, ready for whatever came next. There was a woman 71, a retired librarian, who kept the last voicemail her husband had left on her phone. He had died 3 years ago, on a morning in June, and the voicemail was from the day before. Ordinary, unhurried, his voice saying only that he would be home late because the hardware store was having a sale on garden hose. And did she need anything? She played it every night before bed in the dark, with the phone held close to her ear, the way you hold a seashell. Not because you believe the ocean is inside, but because the ritual of listening is its own comfort. She did not play it to hear the words. She had memorized them long ago. She played it to hear the voice, the particular grain of it, the way he said garden hose as if it were two separate thoughts, the small breath. Before, did she need anything that sounded like he was about to say something else and decided not to? One evening, 3 years and 4 months after his death, she held the phone in her hand and pressed delete, not because she had forgotten him, because she had remembered him enough. The voice was inside her now, not on the phone, but in the particular way she heard the word garden and felt him standing in the doorway. The recording was a copy. The original was in her chest, and it did not need charging, and it could not be accidentally erased. She set the phone on the nightstand. The screen went dark. Outside, a neighbor's sprinkler started up, that soft rhythmic ticking of water hitting grass, and she listened to it the way she used to listen to the voicemail, with her whole attention, and it was enough. The room was quiet in a new way. Not empty quiet, but the quiet of a room that has been cleaned. The Pali word for what lives at the center of all 3 of these stories is upekkha. It is usually translated as equanimity, but that English word sounds cold, clinical, detached, as if equanimity means not caring. Upekkha is the opposite of not caring. It is caring so completely that you no longer need to control the outcome. It is the seamstress writing her 200 letters and then putting them away. It is the potter breaking his best bowl and watching the river carry it. It is the librarian deleting the voicemail because the love it contained had already moved from the phone to the body where it was safe. The Buddha said, "Let us live happily, free from hatred among the hateful, free from illness among the ill, free from greed among the greedy. Let us live feeding on happiness." He was not describing a fantasy. He was describing a choice. The choice to set something down, not because it does not matter, but because your hands are tired and the ground is right here. And the thing you have been carrying will not break if you put it down. It was never as fragile as you thought. And tonight, lying here, if there is something you have been holding, a name, a memory, a sentence someone said that still echoes, you do not need to forgive it right now. You do not need to resolve it, or understand it, or make peace with it tonight. You are allowed to simply rest beside it, the way you rest beside a river. The water moves, the stones stay, and both of them belong here. You are allowed to rest. Nothing needs to be fixed tonight, nothing at all. When you are ready, we will continue together. The night is almost complete now. There is one last place to rest, the quietest place of all, and it is very close. We have walked a long way tonight, you and I, through temples and tea shops and workshops and rivers, through moonlit courtyards and autumn parks and small kitchens where the steam rises from a bowl of oatmeal and the clock ticks on the wall, and the world for a moment asks nothing of you. We have walked with monks and weavers and potters and seamstresses, with bell menders and candle makers, and women who sweep paths that will be covered again by noon. And now the walking is almost done. Take a slow breath. Let the body be where it is. There is nowhere left to go tonight except deeper into this quiet. Do you remember the weaver? She is sleeping now. The loom in the corner of her room is still, the threads hanging loose in the dark. And her hands, those hands that could not stop moving, that wove even when there was no cloth to make, are resting on the blanket, open, the fingers slightly curled, the way a leaf curls when it has finally let go of the branch. The shuttle is on the windowsill. The moonlight finds it and does not move on. She breathes the way the loom breathes when it is not being worked slowly, evenly, a rhythm without effort. And the tea maker, the woman who never saw the same afternoon twice, she has closed the shop for the night. The charcoal in the brazier has burned down to ash, still warm, still giving off a faint smell of smoke and earth. The green cups are washed and turned upside down on the counter, their rims dry, their interiors dark. The door is latched. The road outside is empty, and she is sitting in the chair behind the counter, not because she has work to do, but because the chair is where she belongs, at this hour, the way a stone belongs at the bottom of a stream, not placed there by anyone, just settled. The potter who broke his best bowl is home now, sitting on the step outside his workshop, his hands washed clean of clay. The river is still moving in the dark, carrying pieces of blue-green glaze toward the sea. And he is not thinking about the bowl. He is thinking about the sound it made when it broke. That clean, sharp note, and how it sounded for just a moment, like a bell, like the cracked bell in the mountain monastery, ringing its imperfect tone down the valley through the fog. Both broken, both still singing. The seamstress who wrote 212 letters is asleep in her house, the desk by the window empty, for the first time in 8 years. The ink has dried in the pen. The box of letters sits on the shelf in the closet, beside the winter scarves, and it is not a burden there. It is just a box, just paper and ink, and the weight of a mother's love, which turns out to be surprisingly light when you finally set it down. And the old woman who sweeps the park, she has hung her bamboo broom on the nail by the door and pulled the blanket up to her chin. Tomorrow, the leaves will fall again. Tomorrow, the path will be covered. And tomorrow, she will sweep it again, not because the path needs to be clean, but because the sweeping is its own reward. The rhythm, the sound, the feel of the bristles against the stone. She does not need a reason beyond this. The broom is enough. The path is enough. The morning will come, and she will be there, and that is enough. The nurse, who knelt in her garden, the one who spent 34 years knowing the next step, and then, one spring morning, discovered that not knowing was its own kind of freedom. She is sleeping too. The strip of earth behind her house is dark now, the seeds invisible beneath the soil, and she does not know which ones will sprout and which ones will not, and she is no longer troubled by this. The not knowing has become a kind of faith, not faith in a particular outcome, but faith in the dirt itself, in the rain, in the slow, stubborn persistence of roots, and the seamstress with the slow hands, the one whose stroke took her speed and gave her back attention. She has set aside the navy blouse for the night. The needle is tucked into the fabric, the thread trailing like a thought left unfinished, and her hands rest on the armrest of her chair. The cat is asleep on her lap. The lamp is off. And the stitches she made today, 18 of them, each one different, each one carrying the specific pressure of that specific moment, are holding, not perfectly, but beautifully. The old man who planted bamboo on the hillside is in bed now, listening to the wind move through the grove he planted 30 years ago. The sound reaches him through the open window, that particular whisper of bamboo, like 1,000 pages turning at once. And it is the sound of something he gave away coming back to him, not as a possession but as a visitation, the way a bird returns to a tree it once nested in. He planted for the wind, he said, and the wind came. All of them found the same thing, the weaver and the tea maker and the candle maker and the potter and the seamstress and the sweeper and the carpenter who planed wood without calling it prayer, and the old man who planted bamboo he would never sit under. They all arrived at the same place, not by traveling, but by stopping, by looking at the life they already had, and seeing perhaps, for the first time, that the extraordinary was never somewhere else. It was never in the mountain temple, or the foreign country, or the great achievement. It was here, in the cup of tea, in the sweep of the broom, in the stitch, in the letter, in the bowl breaking against the stone, in the ordinary, sacred, unrepeatable moment that is always happening, always here, always now. The Buddha, near the end of his teaching life, said this: follow the right path. Be virtuous, not careless. The virtuous rest in bliss, in this world and the next. He did not say be perfect. He did not say achieve enlightenment. He said follow the path, rest in bliss, and, perhaps, tonight the path is simply the breath, and the bliss is simply the dark, and the virtue is simply the willingness to lie here and let the day be over without adding anything to it or taking anything away. Tomorrow will come. It always does. The light will find the window the way it always finds the window, slowly, gently, as if it were apologizing for waking you. And when it does, you will open your eyes, and the room will be the same room, and the body will be the same body, and the life will be the same life. But perhaps, and this is my hope for you tonight, perhaps you will see it a little differently. The way the tea maker sees her afternoons, the way the sweeper sees her path, not as something ordinary, but as something sacred, wearing ordinary clothes. Outside your window, wherever your window is, whatever it faces, the night is doing what the night always does. It is holding the world in darkness, the way a hand holds a sleeping bird, completely, gently, with no intention of letting go until the morning comes on its own. The stars, if they are visible, are not watching you. They are simply there, the way the stones in the river are simply there, the way the moss on the temple roof is simply there. Present, patient, unconcerned with your plans or your worries or the number of things left on your list. The night does not have a list. The night has only one task, and it is already doing it. It is being dark. It is being quiet. It is being the space between one day and the next, the pause between two sentences, the rest between two notes, in a song that has been playing since long before you were born and will continue long after. Now let the body settle a little deeper into wherever it is resting. Feel the weight of the head against the pillow. Not a heavy weight, a welcome one. The way a stone feels welcome at the bottom of a clear pond, not sinking, just resting where it belongs. The pillow is not holding you up. You are not holding yourself up. Gravity is doing all the work tonight, and gravity does not get tired, and gravity does not forget. Feel the shoulders. They have been carrying things all day. Not just physical things, though those too, but the invisible things, the plans and the worries and the conversations and the small, persistent sense that there is something you have forgotten to do. Let the shoulders drop. Not dramatically, just the way snow slides off a roof when the sun warms it. Slowly. Silently, without anyone deciding it should happen. The shoulders know how to drop. They have been waiting all day for permission. The hands may still be holding something, a thought, a concern, a fist made so slowly you did not notice it forming. Let the fingers open, not all the way, just enough that the palms face upward, or rest lightly on the blanket, or settle wherever they settle when they are not being asked to do anything. The hands that have held cups and pens and steering wheels and telephones and other hands. They do not need to hold anything right now. They are allowed to be empty. Emptiness is not loss. Emptiness is room. The chest rises. The chest falls. You are not doing this. The body is doing this. The lungs fill and empty, the way the tide fills and empties a harbor. Not because someone told it to, but because that is what tides do, and that is what lungs do, and the rhythm of it is older than language, older than worry, older than the clock on the wall that measures a kind of time the body does not recognize. The belly softens, the hips settle, the legs grow heavy, not with fatigue, but with willingness. The willingness to stop carrying you from room to room and just lie here, long and warm, supported by the bed the way the earth is supported by nothing at all and does not fall. There is nothing to fix tonight. The body does not need repair. The mind does not need silencing. The thoughts that are still moving, let them move. They are not intruders. They are the last guests leaving a party, gathering their coats, saying their goodbyes at the door. They will leave when they are ready. You do not need to show them out. You are not broken. You have never been broken. You have been bent, perhaps, the way the bamboo bends in the wind, not because it is weak, but because bending is what the strong and the flexible do when the wind comes. And the wind always comes, and the bamboo always straightens. And you are straightening now, in this dark, in this quiet, in this breath, not by trying, by resting, by letting the body do what it was designed to do, when you finally stop asking it to do everything else. Imagine, if you like, that the night is a river, not a fast river, a slow one, wide and dark and warm, the kind of river that moves so gently you cannot tell if you are floating or if the water is standing still. The moon is above you, not full, not new, just a sliver, just enough light to see the outline of the trees on the bank and the slow turning of a leaf on the surface beside you. The water holds you, the way water holds everything, without effort, without opinion, without asking what you have done today or what you plan to do tomorrow. You are not swimming, you are not steering, you are floating, and the river knows where it is going, even if you do not, and it will carry you there at exactly the right speed, which is the speed of sleep. Perhaps you can feel it now, the particular kind of tiredness that is not exhaustion but arrival, the tiredness of a traveler who has reached the inn, the tiredness of a gardener who has put the tools away, the tiredness of a bell that has rung its last note for the evening and now hangs in the tower, still vibrating, the sound too faint for human ears but present in the bronze, in the beam, in the fog that curls around the tower and carries the last tremor of sound down the mountain to the valley, where the monks are sleeping. This tiredness is not your enemy. It is your body's oldest friend, the one who comes at the end of every day, reliably, without judgment, without conditions, and says you have done enough, not perfectly, not completely, not the way you planned, but enough. And now it is time to set it all down. The way the tea maker sets down her cloth, the way the potter sets down his bowl, the way the sweeper leans her broom against the gate and walks home through the dew. Let us take 3 last breaths together, not deep breaths. The body does not need depth right now. Gentle breaths, the kind that barely move the chest, the kind that a sleeping person breathes without knowing they are breathing. The first breath. Breathe in slowly, and as you breathe in, let the word peace come into the body. Not as a thought, but as a temperature, a warmth that starts in the center of the chest and spreads outward like ink in water. And breathe out, and let the word release. Leave with the air, not violently, not with force, just the way a hand opens when it has been holding something for a long time, and the fingers finally remember that holding is a choice. The second breath. Breathe in, and let the word enough settle into the body, the way snow settles on a field, quietly, completely, covering everything without effort. Enough, not as a judgment, not as a limit, as a recognition. You have done enough, you have been enough. And breathe out, and let the word rest. Leave with the air, carrying with it the last thin thread of effort, the last small tension in the jaw, the last held note in the long song of the day. The third breath. Breathe in, and let the word here arrive, not as a location but as a fact. You are here, not somewhere else, not in yesterday, not in tomorrow. Here in this bed, in this dark, in this body, in this breath. And breathe out, and let the word home leave with the air. Because this is home, not the room, the body, not the address, the breath. You have always been home. You just forgot for a while. The way you forget the sound of your own heartbeat until someone puts their head against your chest and listens. The night holds you now, the way the river holds the leaf, the way the earth holds the stone, the way the silence holds the last note of a bell that rang a long time ago and is still ringing somewhere in the dark, in the space between one breath and the next. You have done enough. You have carried enough. You have been enough. Let go now, gently, the way the candle lets go of its flame when the wax is spent, not with sadness, with completion. Sleep now. The stories will keep. The monks are in their temples. The tea is in its cups. The letters are in their box. The path is swept. The bowl is in the river. The bamboo is in the wind, and you are here. In this bed, in this body, in this quiet. The woman who swept the courtyard would understand. The candle maker would understand. The book binder, sewing pages in his dusty workshop, would look up from his needle and nod, because he knows what it is to hold something together gently, without forcing, without rushing, and to trust that the stitches will hold through the night. The night is long. The night is kind. The night asks nothing of you except that you be here, and you are here, and that is the last and simplest and most sacred thing. Safe, held, home, sleep.